Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Min and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia, and you listen to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a very special guest speaker, someone who's flown very far away, Melbourne to Brisbane, and it's one of our new staff members, Larissa. Hello.
Hey, Min, it is great to be here in lovely, sunny Brisbane.
Larissa, who, what, where, why, how? Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Etc., etc. What's it going? What's happening?
Firstly, thanks so much for having me on and the past few days being in the office and talking all things specialist disability accommodation. For everyone listening, my background has been in real estate for almost a decade, particularly focusing on off-the-plan projects from high-end luxury to investor stock, apartments, house and land, you name it. Probably have done it in the past few years, with a recent focus on specialist disability accommodation over the past 3 years. So originally I was working with a builder and launched a SDA housing range. That builder now is one of the most reputable builders, I would say, in Victoria. They're merging into South Australia and they've done a bit in Tasmania. But pretty much the reason I wanted to jump on board is that we saw probably a few years ago there was this mentality of build it and they will come, where people were building big group homes without actually having in mind that that home is for a participant, it's their future home. So what we did is like a lot of workshopping around what the participants actually need, what the demand looks like, and putting research first to reverse engineer a product and design. Moving forward to probably today, the interest is more around, I guess, hey, participants don't want to live in the middle of nowhere. They want to be in central locations. So how can we form a product that is either an apartment or closer to hospital? So my kind of expertise lies in how do we reverse engineer a product that actually works with participants that they want to live in, that has enough amenity around and that is compliant as well. There's so many nuances to SDA property and we're always continuing learning. But my background essentially is in property and selling with a recent focus on SDA, and currently at the moment undertaking just the qualification to be an SDA assessor, which a lot of, I find people in property, they have the property knowledge, but not entirely the SDA understanding as well.
Wonderful. So Larissa, in the last 4 or 5 years in Melbourne, there's been obviously a lot of construction development of SDA around Melbourne. Wouldn't you agree?
There has. That is correct.
What do you, from the last 5 years of results, what do you think has worked and not worked in the Melbourne region?
So I think it's an ever evolving kind of question, because what worked 5 years ago probably will not work today.
Explain to me what you mean by that.
So I believe, and the research sort of shows, that as people have started to build these homes, they can overflood areas with certain product types. What I've found has happened is investor groups or investors come in with the, hey, we have a budget of, which everyone has their budgets. But what I've sort of seen is that maybe the Western Corridor is getting a lot of supply, which at the start of the campaign, or at the start of the scheme, I should say, yes, they're getting filled up. But as you obviously get more and more supply in that area, it's not going to work. But what has traditionally happened is people have gone, oh, look, I can't afford more than 800,000, which will put them in a particular area, rather than going maybe to the other side where there's less supply. And I'm particularly for Victoria, I find the southeast is a bit more expensive. You're probably paying like around, let's just say today, about 1 million. But what is actually happening from my perspective is people are coming in and going, hey, we have a set budget, which limits us to a particular area where the land is more affordable. But unfortunately, over the past 5 years, everyone's had that same mentality.
Yes, exactly.
And they've all gone and done that where, so to answer your question, 5 years ago, it would have been fine, but now it's starting to oversupply in certain areas.
Yeah. So basically 4 or 5 years ago, the concept of buying a nice block of land for 200 grand in the west of Melbourne with a nice build price of 450, 500 grand sounded good in theory because there was no stock out there. And everyone, and it was like, okay, there's no stock, there's no supply, let's go there first. And you did that. But what happened was the following 3-4 years after that, everyone did the same thing. And as an investor going in first, you have no control of what's going to happen after the fact. And hence the reason why, as many places around Australia will see now, the more affordable locations being the cheaper land price areas are going to see more entrance of SDA investors, and which creates the potential oversupply that you're talking about, correct, Larissa?
And I think it's kind of as well, what my experience now a few years on is if there was maybe a bit more of an infrastructure as to what was going on in that area, it would provide more insight. So there's a lot of great data coming out from the NDIS reports now, but traditionally it's been quite broad, which it's not to say that these investors had the wrong ethos going in, but they're just, over the past 5 years, I guess it's really been a price point orientated sort of purchase, which unfortunately in some areas there is an oversupply, like the west corridor, certain pockets in the north as well. And when you're actually, this asset type in my experience, if you're going to do it, you do it right. You spend the money in an area where it's inland, close to amenities. You've checked with providers or data sources, or ideally both, that there is demand and there isn't already an oversupply in that area. And you do pay a bit extra because otherwise you're probably tipping that risk reward sort of scale, not in your own favor. If you are going, hey, I want the cheaper version, but I still want the high returns. Everyone would love that, but unfortunately it's not the reality.
So Larissa, first of all, welcome aboard our fantastic team here. I forgot to say that earlier in the piece. Welcome.
Thank you.
In your role the last few years, you've been doing a lot of work with agents and marketers and other little groups and bigger institutions, so to speak. I mean, they're still talking to you now, but now you're like, well, there's probably an easier way to put all this together. What do you, because you've been working so closely to those small and medium and big groups out there, sometimes they don't know what they don't know, and they ask the wrong questions. What are those wrong questions that these advisors and marketers and agents and small family offices and institutions are talking to you and asking you about? Because obviously they don't know everything. They're not in the game. They're actually trying to get into the SDA space. What are they initially asking you, the first few questions?
Oh, look, it's a range. So as you mentioned, I deal with all different types of investor groups, which some are one-man band operators, some are medium-sized offices, some are large institutional groups, and some are funds, and they all kind of look for these investment properties. So it does vary, but the usual questions is, well, let me put it this way. 5 years ago, the first question was, can I get a rental guarantee? Which I don't believe that has worked or ever will work, is my personal opinion. I think that the person that gets into this, they understand that risk reward and they go in fully educated. And to be honest, anyone probably asking for that, they might probably be better opted to a different asset type, because it's not probably limiting yourself in that, in the returns and in the fullness of what it could be. The questions that I'm getting asked today is more around, how do we confirm that it will be leased once it's built? Because there's all these horror stories that, hey, I've heard that once they're built, it takes ages for it to be tenanted. once it's built, there's been compliance issues and there's all these horror stories out there. What I generally tend to find is those horror stories, just going back to what we were talking about before, stem from someone going, I've got a limited borrowing capacity. How can I make it work without actually being in a premium area? So I always try to educate a lot of the agents around, look, all the projects that I've ever been involved in have been research first. They've been demand and data driven, checked by providers as well as to, or as much as possible, no one has a crystal ball, as to, hey, do you believe that this design is suitable? Do you believe that it will tenant out? Obviously, with the caveat that nobody really knows what that participant is going to look like. But yeah, a lot of the questions are around tenancy, funding, and how do I know that the builder's going to be compliant and build the best home?
And when those questions come your way, how do you respond to them?
Look, once again, it depends on taking it back a step. When I do work with agents, I have a very in-depth vetting process. So usually they go through, hey, Mr. Agent, what's your experience with SDA? What have you sold this type of asset before? So that might be, have you sold just house and land? Have you sold apartments? Are you working with, who are you working with? Just to sort of gauge their knowledge first. What I probably would say is not everyone in property wants to put in all the hard yards into SDA research. What actually generally happens is the agency groups have an expectation that the builder developer will package it all together in a nice bundle and do it for them. So there is, what I find for my value is I do put in a bit more research and fill in the gaps. Those questions from agents, they're answered in different ways for different product types. So I guess in a scenario where it's around tenancy, it goes back to, look, if you have a look at the data, we can't guarantee what that participant is looking like. We can't, nobody really can guarantee anything unless for whatever reason there's some form of head lease. Would you agree, Min? But even then it's you can't predict who's in that property. Yeah. What would you think? Like there's no, in my experience, when there's that tenancy question, it's difficult because it's someone that I've not met someone who can give me a definitive answer, and I just don't think there is. And that's why this asset type is a risk reward. So you have to understand that in a best case scenario, this is maybe what your returns would look like. And that's the middle ground. It's not what these market spruikers say is 20, 30%. It's a conservative figure.
Yeah.
But then there's also just running through, well, if it's not this, the investor can expect this return or this return. So it's not having that same methodology of this is the set return and this is what it's going to look like, because you don't know what that participant is going to be at the end of the day and what funding they will have. So it needs to be looked at from a best case, well, a good, better, best scenario on the, hey, it might be vacant for 3 months, it might be vacant for 1 month, and look at the sensitivity analysis. So what is the ranges? And that's all we can really do at the moment, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no set scenario. Or what's your methodology to when the question gets asked around what can I expect for tenancy? What can I expect for returns? What's your...
Well, as we showed you yesterday, Larissa, we can only show a spreadsheet of but the potential outcomes of the tenancy mixes. That's all you can do, right? 1 to 2 funding, 1 to 3 funding, HPS and IL with FA, FA plus FA, whatever it may be, whether it's a 2-resident house or 3-bit resident house. So we don't have a crystal ball, as you say. We can present the potential outcomes. That's all we can do. We give recommendations for who they should be talking to in terms of their SDA providers, who to talk to, who engage. And even then, it's up to the investor to follow through with that recommendation to engage. If they don't engage, it's not our fault. It's them being lazy, isn't it? Sometimes investors want to shop around, so to speak, for a cheaper provider, which there is no cheaper provider because they all charge 12.5% to 15%. 15% is the average across Australia, by the way. And then they forget about it. So there's another issue there. It falls back on the investor to follow through with it. Okay. All we can do as advisors is to show research, data, recommendations, potential outcomes, feasibility analysis, as you say in your words, in your terminology, sensitivity. was it center?
I use the term sensitivity analysis.
Yeah,
so it's just having the range of various number of factors are different.
Yes.
What does that look like in scenario 1, 2, 3, and so on?
Yeah. So that's all we can do. Give as much information as we can and let the investor himself, herself, make the best choice as per the info in front of them. Now, it surprises us a lot that a lot of investors use social media as their form of research, right? And it also is surprising as well that that even though a lot of investors who contact our office are aware of our research data and services for reports, they don't really engage the reporting services. They just buy off the cuff of whatever they think is appropriate. So I think investors should do more research because they don't see things that we see. They don't talk to multiple providers. They don't see stock lists coming out from other builders and developers. They don't see that. Because they don't see that, they can't see the potential risks in those outer areas of certain metro locations. They don't see the varying prices available for this builder or that builder or this developer for the apartment high rises or the apartment low rise or whatever. Project builders versus custom builders, blue chip builders versus small startup low res builders. So there's all these types of risk and product providers, but product providers being the builders and construction guys out there, obviously. And then also, doing background checks. So many, I say this with all due respect, so many investors don't do their background checks on the builders or the developers or the agent. Okay. And I want to say this very clearly so that people can hear what I'm about to say here. I was talking to a very prominent SDA provider just a few nights ago, and he was telling me that in this region in Perth, south of Perth, there was a small estate of about 62 land lots, and half of those 62 lots are SDA builds. The normal rule of thumb, as per the NDIS density, is 10% in an estate. The 10% of 62 is 6. Yeah. But yet we have 32 builds of SDAs because the land developer didn't give a rat's ass. He wanted to sell his land lots at a higher price. The builders didn't care or they didn't know. How would builders know there's another 20 other builders, building next door? How do they know? There's lack of transparency here. And I can assure you, when those 32 builds are finished, there's going to be a lot of empty houses there, which means a lot of investors crying poor when they're all empty for the next year. Because when you're selling those houses, house and land packages, that's $5,000 a month in interest payments, if not P&I payments. That's $60,000 a year in payments and no income on those 32 houses sitting there empty in this location an hour south of Perth. OMG. WTF. I don't know what to say about that because, did anyone do their homework and their research and their data analysis? No one. Because everyone has their own agenda. The land developer's trying to sell his land, he doesn't care. The builders just want to build houses, they don't care. And I know that some of those agents, they don't care about tenancy. Word is going around on the grapevine, them saying, we don't care about tenancy. They don't care. So, ladies and gentlemen listening on this podcast, be very, very careful who you do business with, right? And then that's my advice to you, Larissa. When these investors go to these referral third parties, consultants who are either accountants or mortgage brokers or other agents or family officers or whatever, and they come to you, Larissa, you got to vet them as well.
I do.
Vet the referral third party, vet the client, vet everything, because you don't want it to come back on your shoulders, the burden of
that, yeah,
of that disaster.
Yeah, and look, the approach has been after working with different agents over the past 3 years, have a very good indication of who actually just talk and who actually performs as well and does things for the right reason. So there's a lot of people out there that want to get into SDA. My first question to anyone that asks me about a project is, 1, have you sold it before? What's your experience? What is your experience with providers? What is what is your statement to clients around tenancy, and how do you describe when someone goes, what is the yield? And from that, I have a pretty good indication on how that's going to go and if I want to be involved with this agency group in a transaction. Because at the end of the day, this is a very different asset type that has so many different levels of complexities. We're not just talking about an entry level product.
Yeah.
Ideally, the purchaser who buys these products is either an astute investor, or sometimes I believe that they come through and they've got a bit of equity there. They've been well versed and educated, and they've gone through the whole feasibility. It works for them. They might be a mum and dad looking to access their super, and they have a bit of equity sitting there, and they're like, look, this is the logical step for us. And they're well educated. But usually I'd say 8 times out of 10, it's an astute investment product for someone that understands risk and reward and understands that there is a ranging return, and that the first thing is first, this is a participant-led product. So you don't really get to dictate around, I would like it in this area. It is demand-driven. It is designed for that participant, for the forever home at a core. And I have said no to agents who go, look, we want to do X, Y, Z and be paid X, Y, Z. I've gone, look, simply, it's not something that I want to promote. We're about ethical agents and ethical people wanting to kind of rewrite. Or my thing I always say is, how do we debunk the misconceptions and re-educate people around how it actually works? Because there's so much misinformation out there. You Google NDIS and there's articles from agents, there's articles from providers, there's all these different sources out there. But my kind of ethos is, like, after working in the industry for so long, vet the groups, provide as much information as possible for all of the common questions around tenancy, compliance, financing hurdles, how much equity is needed, have it all there so that there's fully transparent about the pros and the cons of everything and what to expect. The valuation shortfalls is one of the things. Yes, this is sometimes a reality of this product. But with that, a lot of the groups are vetted and already understand this is how it works. But just having that fully transparent suite of this is how, and this is for this specific project that might be house and land in Cranbourne East, this is what to expect. And the conversation with the client should be just as transparent. These are the pros, these are the cons. And a lot of the groups that I deal with, as I mentioned before, they work on a good, better, best scale. They don't promise returns. They simply won't work with anyone really going, hey, I simply won't even talk to them, to be honest, but they're promising it's a 20, 30% market return. That it's just not the best. It's not in the best interest of the client to tell them that in any case, because it's just not simply how it works.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in your new role as sales and marketing manager in our organisation, being based in Melbourne, Larissa, you'll be able to filter and vet and assist those third-party referrers who want to do good by the sector and assist them with their clients in getting them into the right product, because how else are clients and those inexperienced agents supposed to vet the market and the data and the products themselves out there? And we hopefully will be able to work with you as an organisation to help support you in your endeavours, representing our brand to your network of agents and referrers to help them make good decisions. And hopefully in 2024, there'll be a lot more project releases that we can bring to the table in which you will assist and bring to market in the Melbourne area as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We started talking 3 years ago, I think, nearly. And I've always understood the power of market research in any scenario, not just SDA. And I think what our team at NDIS Property have done is, with the data, really made it a fine art to work and give the best information to that client. It's something that I will be definitely recommending to every agent with a purchaser, that they pay for the reports up front so they know what they're in for. And that is, hey, would you rather spend $1 million or somewhere around that sort of price point with no knowledge? Or would you rather pay for a report, get an understanding, be comfortable with the facts of that specific area, the demand, what the feasibility looks like, or what the sensitivity analysis looks like? And I think it's a very great, valuable tool. It's amazing the data that you compile. Like I was chatting to, is it your data scientist the other day?
Lenore, yes.
Lenore, yes. And just the effort that goes into those reports, like it's 4 or 5 pages in the supply demand report. There's the feasibility report, which goes through all the cash flowing in relation to that specific property. And why wouldn't you? Why would you not want that research?
Why would you go in blind?
Yeah.
That's the statement trying to say. Yeah. You know, and in saying so, what you want to do your homework on the product, the location, the cash flow, the sensitivity analysis of different variables, and also do a report on the builder. It's $400 to do that, by the way. So it's $200 to do a report on the data. It's $400-500 to do a report on feasibility with us. It's $400 to do a background check on the builder. That's $1,000 there, Larissa. Before we spend $1 million, spend $1,000. Please, people, do your homework. Pay for the cost of the reports. Don't jump in blind like everyone else is out there. And that's my advice to everyone. Larissa, when you came to our office 2-3 days ago, what was your impression of our staff and our office culture and your first impressions there and the people here?
It's been a really refreshing approach coming into the office and meeting the whole team. Even though I guess at a core you are a sales agency, would you say, Min? There is this education first and this really authentic approach, which is non-transactional, but more educational. So my belief is that I personally don't like the idea of pitching and being too salesy. I think that numbers and data and telling a story should speak for itself and indicate that decision. That's exactly what you've done. You've provided absolutely everything in an ethical and easy to digest form, and your staff are very helpful. They're not trying to push someone into a sale. It's all about education, making that person comfortable, explaining to them all the nuances that is SDA property, re-educating them from maybe an article they've read or someone they spoke to, or maybe something that they had misheard about. It's this. And your team is actually, I think, changing what the perception is of NDIS through education, which is an amazing thing to do. You've got your podcast, you've got a lot of market share out there. And I think the team are really a testament to, hey, when you do the research and you do things for the right reason, it works.
Thank you. The team here are wonderful. They work hard and they're not from a property background. No one is. They're all from marketing and travel. And that was the goal here, to present to clients and the community and the sector that even people with no experience and no knowledge can contribute to the SDA sector in a positive light without hurting anyone. And our goal is to learn ourselves and to share that the learnings of what we've learned in the data analysis and research and networking within the community to the greater network that we have here. So we'll just put our heads down and keep on working hard and go from there. And that's why we welcome you, Larissa, to join our team and be part of our growth as well, because we're all about helping. Think without giving and receive without forgetting. So we want to just help and help and help. We're here to serve. And by doing the right thing ourselves, in turn, you yourself, Larissa, in Melbourne, will be able to work with people with the right mindset and values and ethics. And that's the core principle, As I said to you here on the whiteboard, the lowest statement there, learn when to say no. If you're talking to someone who should not be in SDA, it's okay to say no. To say to them, maybe you shouldn't be investing in this because you don't know enough or understand the risks. And that's just my advice to you, Larissa. As you go back to Melbourne tonight and go from there, yeah.
Yeah, and I think with this sort of investment, the conversation over the years has always been with brokers or with agents. If they're not a right fit, maybe it's not right for them. It's not something that you can
force.
Yeah. It's, I guess, looking from, the cost of the asset, the higher front costs as well, and the cash needed for the vacancy period when it's getting enrolled and finding that first tenant. it's not for the lighthearted. So it is better to not force someone into something that could financially ruin them, to be quite honest, to take the time and actually work out what is best for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is no, this isn't for you. And that's the approach that I've taken with different groups, funds, and different various people who are interested in this asset type over the years. Hey, if you don't understand it, don't jump in and go, hey, I want to buy 10 SDA properties or whatever it is. Dip your feet in the water. Let's slowly progress the conversation. A gentleman at the moment I've been dealing with for, I think, nearly 5 months. They've done something really interesting. So they've got a group of people, raised some funds, heard about NDIS, seen it everywhere. They're like, we want to do SDA. Didn't really quite know too much more than it's high returns and it's good. It's government backed. That was literally our first conversation. And the first thing I said, look, let's just take a step back. What's your experience with SDA property? Because he was like, oh, we've just raised all these funds. We want to get into it. We want to do this. He goes, oh, absolutely nothing. We've invested into XYZ and we've never done NDIS. So you've raised all this money and you don't know anything about it, quite frankly. And they said, yes, but we've heard it's good. And this is the thing. So this is a common, unfortunately, there is a few misconceptions out there that, hey, it is high returns, whether they've heard that from an agent or they've read it somewhere. And it does need that, no, let's take a slower approach. Let's break it down into even a few conversations until you're comfortable. With this specific client, what we've actually decided is rather than buying 10, 15 properties at once, let's start off with one. Let's see how you go. And this has taken 6 months of conversations around how does it work? Who pays the maintenance costs? What happens in case we can't find a participant? And going through multiple different questions from around, I think it's a group of 20 people altogether. So you can imagine there's probably some people on the yes team, there's people on the no team and going through that process. But it's a really true testament to, at one point in time, I was like, do you know what? Maybe it's not for you if there's this hesitation. And for a few months we didn't speak, but they've recently reached out and said, look, we've done some further research and we're really eager to just test out with doing one. So I think it is a longer conversation. I find it is worth it to make sure that people make well-informed decisions. It is very hard, I will admit, when I'm dealing with different groups to control the narrative and conversations. But what I found is preparing the most transparent documents and information helps the outcome for everyone involved. So not just the agent, not just the investor, but the participant and the whole industry as well, as having that real forthright and transparent approach.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Larissa, thank you so much for your time. Any final words of advice by you to our listeners about anything SDA?
All I want to say is this has been a very, I guess, agent-focused probably back and forth. But I just wanted to actually say, look, for people wanting to invest into NDIS, do your research on agents and don't just, I think, settle with one. Maybe even get some advice from a few, because 9 times out of 10, I feel like everyone's still learning in this industry. I'm still learning as well. I'll admit that. But it is not a simple asset type. So I'd always, if you are at that initial phase, speak to Min, speak to NDIS Property, of course. But if this is your first time probably listening and you're speaking to a few different groups, just make sure that you're getting information from the right source that's correct. And people aren't just telling you what you want to hear, is my probably last and final words.
Yeah, you're right. Don't listen to people who are saying the things that you want to hear. Good advice.
It's too good to be true, they say.
Larissa, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Welcome aboard. And hopefully in the new year, being 2024, we'll hear more of what you have to say about the launch of our special projects around Melbourne, inner and CBD, which is specific to SDA, okay?
No, fantastic. And thanks for having me, Min.
Cool. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.